Lillian was a woman who always worked very hard. She grew up in a small neighborhood with her mother, who taught her to never give up and always stand strong. Life was not easy for Lillian, but she never complained. She worked hard, never gave up, and became the owner of her own business. She built her company from nothing and became very successful. She had a good life where she didn't have to listen to anyone but herself. But there was one thing she could never find: love. Lillian had tried to find love many times. She had dated different men, and some even wanted to marry her, but something was always missing. Some men were scared of her success, while others just wanted to take advantage of it. Some wanted her to take care of them, and others only cared about how she looked. But no one loved her for who she truly was. Then she met Lucas. Lucas was different from any other man. He was tall, with bright blue eyes and a smile that could make anyone feel happy. He was kind, smart, and full of confidence. He wasn't afraid of her success. Instead, he admired it. They met at a party for charity, and Lillian almost didn't go. But at the last minute, she decided to attend. The moment Lucas talked to her, she felt something special. He listened when she spoke about her business, asked good questions, and shared his own stories about work. By the end of the night, she wanted to know more about him. Their first date was like a dream. Lucas planned everything perfectly. He took her to a beautiful rooftop dinner under the stars, played her favorite jazz songs, and made her feel special. Lillian, who had always been careful with her heart, found herself letting Lucas in. She felt safe and happy with him. Their love grew fast, and for the first time, Lillian felt truly understood. Lucas didn't just love her. He supported her and celebrated her success like it was his own. Lillian thought she had finally found her fairy tale. But soon, small things started to worry her. Sometimes, Lucas would get upset when other men looked at her. Other times, he would sound sharp when she was too busy with work. In public, if she spoke too confidently, his mood would change. But Lillian ignored these little signs because she loved him. Then one day, she found out she was going to have a baby. At first, she was scared. She had never thought about becoming a mom before. She was always too busy making her dreams come true. But Lucas was so happy. He lifted her in his arms, spun her around, and promised that they would have a wonderful life together. "We are going to be a family," he told her. "I will take care of you and our baby. You will never have to worry about anything." For the first time in her life, Lillian believed in a future with someone else. She had always stood alone, but now she had someone to lean on. But as her belly grew bigger, Lucas started to change. He still went with her to doctor's appointments, still kissed her, and still said he loved her. But his touch felt colder, and his eyes didn't shine the same way. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just nerves about becoming a father. But something inside her didn't feel right. Lucas's parents never liked Lillian much. They were rich and cared a lot about family names and traditions. Even though they were nice in public, she always knew they didn't approve of her. Lucas told her not to worry, but she wondered if he was starting to feel the pressure from his family. Then came the biggest surprise of all. She was having 3 babies. She was going to have triplets. 3 tiny lives growing inside her. When she told Lucas, he smiled and congratulated her, but something about his face didn't seem right. She told herself he was just shocked. After all, no one expects to have 3 babies at once. She believed that everything would be okay. She and Lucas loved each other. They would figure it out together. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, her life would change forever. The day Lillian went into labor was nothing like she had imagined. She thought Lucas would hold her hand and tell her everything would be okay. She thought they would cry happy tears together when their babies were born. But instead, it turned into a nightmare she would never forget. Lillian was taken to the hospital 2 days before her due date because her contractions started early. The doctors told her that carrying triplets was risky, so they watched her closely. Lucas was there at first, but he seemed nervous. He walked around the hospital room, not looking at her much. When nurses came in, he kept asking how long it would take, like he just wanted it to be over. Lillian was in so much pain, but Lucas didn't hold her hand. Then the doctors said they had to do an emergency C-section because the baby's heartbeats were getting weak. They had to act fast. Lillian was scared, but trusted that Lucas would be with her. As they rolled her into the bright, cold operating room, she reached for his hand. He held it, but it didn't feel strong. "I'll be right here," he said, but his voice didn't sound sure. Lillian wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. The room was full of beeping machines and doctors moving quickly. Lillian couldn't feel her lower body, only pressure as the doctors worked. Her heart pounded as she waited to hear her baby's cries. Then they came. First one, then two, then three. Her newborns were finally here. Tears filled Lillian's eyes. She turned her head to see Lucas's reaction. But when she saw his face, her heart dropped. Lucas wasn't smiling. He wasn't crying happy tears. He just stood there, staring at the babies with a strange look in his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. The nurses cleaned the babies and got them ready to place in Lillian's arms. But Lucas didn't look at her. He just kept staring at the babies. And then, without a word, he turned around and walked out of the room. Lillian felt like she couldn't breathe. "Lucas," she called out weakly, but he was already gone. A nurse gently placed one of the babies in her arms. Lillian held the tiny baby close, feeling love and confusion at the same time. She wanted to believe Lucas would come back. She told herself he was just overwhelmed. But deep down, she felt something was terribly wrong. Lillian felt something bad in her stomach. Something was wrong. Hours passed, but Lucas didn't come back. The nurses told her not to worry. They said maybe he just needed some time to think because becoming a dad was scary. But Lillian knew that wasn't true. This was something else. After some time, she was taken to a quiet room with her newborn babies. She was so tired that she fell asleep. When she woke up, her mother, Victoria, was sitting beside her. She was holding one of the babies, rocking it gently. Seeing her mom there made Lillian feel a little better. But then she saw the sad look on her mother's face. Her heart started beating fast. "Lillian," Victoria said softly. Her voice sounded worried. "Lucas is gone." It felt like all the air had been knocked out of Lillian's chest. "What do you mean he's gone?" she asked. Her throat felt dry. Victoria looked nervous. "He left," she said. "The nurses said he stormed out of the hospital after you gave birth. He didn't even sign the papers. He just left." Lillian felt cold all over. This couldn't be real. She tried to sit up even though it hurt. "Did he say anything? Did he leave a message?" she asked quickly. Victoria sighed and pulled an envelope from her purse. "He left this," she said. Lillian's hands were shaking as she grabbed it. She tore it open and read the note inside. The words were messy, like someone had written them in anger. "I know what you did. I know these aren't my children. Don't ever come back to my house. We're done." The world started spinning. Lillian held on to the note tightly. No, this couldn't be true. How could Lucas think these weren't his babies? Like she had never been with anyone else. She had always been faithful. This didn't make sense. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at her babies. They were so small, so perfect. Of course, they were his. But he had left them. He had left her. Her mother's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Lillian, I went to the house to get some things for you," Victoria said. She looked upset. "He locked you out. Your keys don't work." She paused, then said, "And the bank account, he emptied it." Lillian gasped. Every penny she had saved, every dollar she had put into their future, it was all gone. Lucas hadn't just left her and the babies. He had taken everything. She had nothing left. She closed her eyes, her whole body shaking. She wanted to scream. She wanted to march out of the hospital and make Lucas look her in the eye. But she couldn't. She had 3 babies now. They needed her. She had no time to be angry, no time to cry. She had to survive. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath. Her mother held her hand tightly. Lillian looked at her babies again. Lucas had abandoned them, but she would not. She would not let him destroy her. She would not give up. She had to be strong. The next day she left the hospital. Her mother carried the babies while a nurse helped Lillian into a wheelchair. As they reached the hospital doors, Lillian felt like she was in a dream. Lucas should have been there. He should have been helping her into the car. But he wasn't. He was gone. The car ride to her mother's house was quiet. Lillian stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She had worked so hard for a good life. She had done everything right, and yet here she was, homeless, penniless, abandoned. But she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her children. She had to keep going. Her mother's house was small but warm. Lillian had grown up there. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Victoria had set up a crib in the guest room. Lillian carefully placed the babies inside, watching them sleep. The reality hit her all over again. She was alone. No one could fix what Lucas had done. She had to figure this out herself. The next few weeks were hard. Taking care of one baby was exhausting, but taking care of 3 was even harder. Lillian barely slept. Every few hours she had to wake up to feed them. This changed them and rock them to sleep. She was so tired. The pain of Lucas's betrayal was still fresh in her heart, but she had no time to think about it. She had to keep going. Her mother helped as much as she could, but money was tight. Lillian needed a job, but finding work while recovering from childbirth and taking care of 3 babies was almost impossible. Before, she had a business she loved. She had planned to take a short break and then go back to work with Lucas's support. But now, she had no choice. She had to start over. At night, while the babies slept, she searched for jobs. She sent applications everywhere. She couldn't be picky. She just needed money to take care of her children. More than that, she needed to prove to herself that she could survive without Lucas. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, things got better. She found a job at a small marketing firm. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. When she got her first paycheck, she used it to buy diapers, formula, and baby clothes. It felt good to know she could provide for her children on her own. She had been left with nothing, but she was standing again. Life wasn't easy. Lillian worked long hours and barely slept, but she was learning how to survive. Every morning, she kissed her babies goodbye before going to work. Every night, she collapsed into bed, exhausted. Her mother took care of the babies while she worked. It was hard, but she was doing it. She was rebuilding her life. Then, the letters started. At first, she didn't think much of them. The first one was in her mailbox, written in messy handwriting. "You lied to me. You think you've won, but you haven't." Lillian stared at the note, her stomach twisting. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone had sent it to the wrong house. But then another letter came, and another. Each one was scarier than the last. "I know what you did. You ruined my life. You will regret this." She didn't need to guess who was sending them. She knew it was Lucas. The thought of him watching her, still holding on to his anger, sent chills down her spine. But she refused to be scared. She had worked too hard to escape his shadow. She wouldn't let him pull her back down. One night she came home very late after working for a long time. When she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The living room looked the same. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken. But the air felt different, like someone had been there. She didn't understand why she felt this way until she went to her bedroom. There, on her pillow, was a letter. Her hands shook as she picked it up. The words on the paper made her heart pound. "You think you can keep me away? You think you can erase me? You're wrong." Fear rushed through her body. Someone had been inside her house. She ran straight to the room where her babies were sleeping. Her heart was racing as she checked on them. They were safe, still asleep, but just the thought of someone being near them made her feel sick. It was Lucas. He was getting braver, and she was running out of time. The next morning, she took the letter to the police. She told them everything: the scary letters, the break-in, the feeling of being watched. But the police didn't help. They just told her, "Be careful. If anything else happens, let us know." That wasn't enough. Lillian walked out of the station feeling completely alone. Days passed, and Lillian became extra careful. She changed the locks, installed cameras, and checked the doors every night. But the fear stayed. She didn't tell her mom because she didn't want her to worry. Instead, she kept everything to herself. She was always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next letter, the next threat. Then, something even worse happened. That evening, Lillian went to pick up the triplets from school. She was tired but happy the day was almost over. As she walked toward the school gate, her son Gabriel ran up to her, holding a folded piece of paper. "A man gave me this," he said, smiling. "He told me to give it to you." Lillian's whole body turned cold. She grabbed the note from Gabriel's small hands, unfolding it with shaking fingers. "I can always get close to you. To them. Now do you believe me?" Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break. Lucas had been there. He had been close enough to her children to give them a letter. She wanted to scream, cry, run away. But she forced herself to stay calm. She knelt down and held Gabriel's shoulders. "What did the man look like, baby?" she asked softly. Gabriel shrugged. "I don't know. He just said you'd know who he was." Lucas. Lillian stood up, her hands shaking with anger. Enough. She wasn't going to let Lucas scare her anymore. It was time to stop him. That night, she hardly slept. Every noise, every little sound in the house made her jump. She checked the locks again and again. She stared at the security camera feed on her phone. She listened to her children breathing as they slept. But no matter how careful she was, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Lucas had crossed the final line. He had gone from writing scary letters to getting close to her children. And she would never forgive that. The next morning, Lillian called the school. She demanded to see the security camera footage. The principal didn't want to show her at first. "Parents aren't allowed to see the videos without permission," he said. But Lillian didn't back down. After an hour of arguing, they finally let her watch. She sat in a small office, her hands clenched together as the footage played on the screen. Children ran across the playground. Parents stood near the front gate. Teachers helped kids onto buses. Then she saw him, a man in a dark hoodie. He stood near the entrance, his back turned to the camera. He didn't talk to the kids, but then he stepped closer to Gabriel. Lillian held her breath as she saw Gabriel take something from him. The note. The camera angle was bad. The man never turned to show his face. But Lillian knew. She knew the way he stood, the stiffness in his shoulders. It was Lucas. The security guard paused the video. "Do you know who this is?" he asked. Lillian exhaled sharply, her stomach twisted. "Yes, his name is Lucas Carter. He's my ex, and he's not supposed to be near my kids." The principal, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. "If he's a danger, we need to tell the police. Do you have a restraining order?" Lillian swallowed hard. "No," she admitted. "I didn't think I needed one before." She hated saying that. She had thought Lucas was gone, that he had moved on, that she was safe. But she had been wrong. The principal gave her a kind look. "You should get one right away. In the meantime, we'll make sure the teachers know about him. If he comes near your children again, we'll call the police." Lillian nodded and left the office. But deep down, she knew a restraining order wouldn't stop Lucas. He didn't follow rules. He wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. And she still didn't know what that was. The rest of the day felt like a blur. Her mind raced with questions. Lucas had always claimed the triplets weren't his. He had left her when they were born, refusing to take a paternity test. So why was he back now? Why was he so obsessed with her and the children? That night, after putting the kids to bed, Lillian sat on the couch with her laptop. She needed to know more about Lucas. She hadn't searched for him in years, but now she had to. At first, she found nothing important, old job profiles, social media accounts he hadn't used in years. But then she saw something that made her freeze. A news article. Shosh, wealthy real estate heir accused of fraud disappears without a trace. Her breath caught as she clicked on it. The article was from 3 years ago. It told a story about a big financial fraud case. Lucas's old company had stolen a lot of money. Their CEO had been arrested. Some employees had gone to jail. And Lucas, he had vanished. Lillian's hands trembled as she kept reading. People believed Lucas had taken some of the stolen money and run away. Some even said he had changed his name to hide. But nothing had ever been proven. He had been running, hiding. And now, after all these years, he had come back. Her blood turned to ice. Lucas wasn't here just to scare her. He needed something. And whatever it was, he wouldn't stop until he got it. Lillian looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale. Her eyes were full of exhaustion and worry. She had spent years trying to rebuild her life, trying to forget about Lucas. But in just a few weeks, he had brought back all the fear she thought was gone. But this time, she wasn't the same woman she used to be. She wasn't the scared person who begged him to stay, to listen, to care. This time, she was ready to fight. She spent the whole night reading every article, every forum, every report about Lucas. The more she read, the clearer the truth became. He had been part of a scam. Maybe he was guilty. Maybe he had been used. But one thing was certain. Lucas had nothing now. No home. No power. That's why he had come back. And the thought of it filled her with rage. After everything he had done, after all the pain he caused, he still thought he could come back and ruin her life. She shut her laptop with a loud snap. Her head hurt and she rubbed her temples, feeling very tired. Her children, no longer babies, but still her little ones, were sleeping in their rooms down the hall. She couldn't let this go on. It was time to take action. The next morning, she made 2 important phone calls. The first was to a lawyer. She needed a restraining order to keep Lucas away, but more than that, she had to make sure Lucas had no legal right to take her children. She was afraid he might do something bad. The second call was to an old friend, a private investigator she used to work with when she had her own business. He owed her a favor, and now she was asking him to help. She wanted to know everything about Lucas, what he was doing, what he was planning. She needed to be ready before he made a move. A few hours later, she sat at the kitchen table with her mother. Then the phone rang. It was the investigator. His voice sounded unsure, like he wasn't sure if he should tell her what he had found. "Lillian," he said, "there's something you need to know about Lucas's family, something he might not know." Lillian gripped the phone tightly and sat up straighter. "Go on." Lucas's father, the man he grew up calling Dad, is not his real father. His mother had an affair before he was born. The man Lucas thought was his dad was never really his father. Lillian's mind froze. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you sure?" "I found medical records, old letters, and sealed legal papers. His real father was a black man. Lucas's mother hid the truth, but in his blood he is mixed race. That explains why your children look the way they do. They were always his, Lillian. He lied to you." Everything around Lillian blurred. She had gone through years of pain, feeling betrayed, feeling abandoned, but it had all been a lie. Maybe Lucas had known, or maybe he hadn't, but it didn't matter. The truth was always there, hidden in the shadows. He had been cruel to her, accused her of terrible things, and left her to suffer. And all of it had been for nothing. A slow, burning anger filled her. He had destroyed their family over something that was never real. He had left her alone, forced her to struggle while she raised his children all by herself. And now, after all these years, he was back, threatening her, watching her, trying to scare her. She had wasted too much time crying over a man who had never deserved her love. She thanked the investigator, hung up the phone, and let out a shaky breath. Her mother, who had been listening, spoke first. "What did he say?" Lillian looked at her mother, her face unreadable. Lucas's father wasn't his real father. His mother had an affair. His real father was black. Her mother's eyes widened. So, the children were always his? Yes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The truth sat between them like a heavy weight. Then, her mother, always the practical one, nodded firmly. So what are you going to do now? Lillian lifted her chin. Her eyes were cold, but her voice was steady. I'm going to end this, for good. She had always thought that learning the truth about Lucas would bring her peace, that knowing he had ruined their family over a lie would make it easier to move on. But instead, it lit a fire inside her. She had suffered for too long. She had cried, lost sleep, doubted herself, all because Lucas had chosen to run away instead of facing reality. And now he was back, trying to frighten her into submission. She wasn't going to let him win. Within 24 hours, the restraining order was filed. Her lawyer said it would be approved quickly because of everything Lucas had done. But even that wasn't enough. Lucas had already broken into her home, sent threats, and worst of all, gotten close to her children. A piece of paper wouldn't stop him. She needed to be ready for whatever happened next. For days she stayed alert, watching, waiting. She barely slept. She checked the security cameras again and again. She double-checked the locks. Her children were never out of sight, never alone for even a second. If Lucas tried something again, she would be prepared. Then one evening, as she was locking the door for the night, her phone buzzed with a text message. Come outside! Her stomach twisted. There was no name, but she knew who it was. She walked slowly to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Her breath caught in her throat. Lucas was standing across the street. Even from far away, she could see how desperate he looked. His shoulders were slumped, his clothes wrinkled, his face thinner than before. He looked like a man who had been losing a battle for a long time. And now he was at his breaking point. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. She stepped away from the window, took a deep breath, and called the police. Then she walked to the front door. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to be afraid. This was going to end. By the time she stepped outside, Lucas had moved closer. He stood at the edge of her driveway. His eyes darted around like he knew he shouldn't be there, but couldn't help himself. You finally came out, he said, his voice rough. Lillian crossed her arms, keeping her distance. What do you want, Lucas? He let out a bitter laugh. What do I want? You took everything from me. My life, my family. You turned my own children against me. Her jaw tightened. I didn't turn them against you. You left them. You walked away. I thought they weren't mine, he shouted. Do you think I wanted to believe that? My whole life I was told my family was pure, that my father... He stopped, shaking his head, as if saying it out loud made him feel sick. You have no idea what it was like finding out everything was a lie. Lillian took a step forward. Her voice was steady. And what did you do when you found out the truth, Lucas? Did you come back and make things right? No, you ran. You let me struggle. You let your children grow up without you. And then, when you had nothing left, you came crawling back, sending threats, breaking into my home, scaring me, scaring them. Lucas flinched but didn't argue. You ruined me, he whispered. Lillian clenched her fists. No, Lucas, you ruined yourself. Silence stretched between them. For a brief moment, she saw something in his eyes. Regret, maybe. But then it was gone, replaced by something darker. His jaw tightened and his gaze shifted toward the house. Where are they? He asked. Her breath hitched. Don't. Lucas took a step forward. And then, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. Police sirens roared. Officers jumped out of their cars, surrounding them. Lucas stiffened. His body tensed. You called the cops on me? Lillian didn't answer. She didn't need to. Two officers stepped forward, guns drawn. Hands up, they commanded. For a second, she thought Lucas might run, but slowly he raised his hands. They pushed him against the hood of a police car, cuffing his wrists behind his back. He turned to look at her one last time. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice low and angry. Lillian looked him in the eyes without fear. "It already is." Then she turned her back on him and walked away forever. For the first time in years, Lillian woke up without fear. The bad dreams that had scared her, the worry, the feeling that she always had to look over her shoulder, they were finally starting to go away. Lucas was gone. He had been arrested and taken out of her life, and with him the pain he had caused was starting to disappear. The house was quiet. The morning sunlight came through the curtains. Lillian lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. She let the silence surround her. It felt strange. She had been scared for so long that peace felt new. She wasn't sure what to do with it, but she wasn't going to waste it. She had fought too hard to feel safe again. She rolled onto her side and looked at the clock. It was almost time for the triplets to wake up. They had grown so much. Their laughter filled the house, reminding her why she had fought so hard. They didn't know everything that had happened. She had protected them from the worst. But they knew one thing. The man who had hurt her and left them was never coming back. Lillian got out of bed, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. Her mother was already there, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Victoria looked up and smiled when she saw Lillian. "How does it feel?" Lillian opened the fridge and took out the milk for the kids' breakfast. "Strange but good. Free," Victoria nodded. "You deserve that." Lillian took a deep breath. "I know." And for the first time, she truly believed it. The last few days had been busy. After Lucas was arrested, she had spent hours at the police station answering questions and giving proof. She had to make sure there was enough evidence to keep him in jail. It wasn't easy to talk about everything again, but it had to be done. Her lawyer told her that Lucas had many charges against him: stalking, breaking into her house, and bothering her. That meant he wouldn't get out anytime soon. But Lillian knew the law. She knew that one day he might try to come back. But she would be ready. She wasn't the scared woman she used to be. She had built herself back up, and this time there was nothing left for Lucas to break. The sound of little feet running on the floor pulled her from her thoughts. The triplets ran into the kitchen, laughing, their faces still sleepy. "Mommy!" Gabriel was the first to reach her, hugging her waist. "Can we have pancakes?" Lillian smiled and ruffled his curly hair. "I think that can be arranged." Madeline and Caleb cheered and climbed into their chairs. Victoria chuckled as she watched Lillian move around the kitchen. She hadn't seen her daughter this happy in years. As Lillian flipped the pancakes, she thought about how far they had come. She remembered the nights when she had been too scared to sleep. She remembered waking up each morning dreading the day. But now, she didn't feel that fear anymore. There was no more worry, no more looking over her shoulder. Now, there was only the future. A few hours later, after breakfast was finished and the kids were playing in the backyard, Lillian sat down with her laptop. It was time to take the next step. For years, she had worked hard to take care of her children. She had taken any job she could to keep them safe. But now, she was ready for more. She had once started her own business, a dream she had built before Lucas took everything from her. And now she was ready to bring it back to life. She had the experience, she had the knowledge, and now she had the money to start again. It wouldn't be easy. It would take time and effort. But Lillian had learned one thing. She could survive anything. She opened her old business plan, the one she had made years ago before everything fell apart. She made some changes, added new goals, and started making phone calls. By the time the sun started to set, she had already planned meetings, reconnected with old friends, and set her sights on getting back what was once hers. That night, after putting the kids to bed, she sat beside them for a long time. She stroked their hair, listening to their gentle breathing. She had done it. She had protected them, and now she was going to give them the life they deserved. As she stood up and turned off the light, one last thought filled her heart. Lucas had been a chapter in her story, a painful, terrible chapter. But he wasn't the end, not even close. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.